perhaps if another country in the Middle East had nuclear weapons, then there would be that less of a chance of the first
deterrence.
First yeah, maybe the deterrence, as like we talked about East and West. And also
Well,
in the same case,
that's the hopeful side in between India and Pakistan. If they both have them, then maybe there'll be a deterrent. To be honest with you, I don't think they are safe in the hands of any country. Probably safer, as I said earlier, in the hands of East and West, because we do have that deterrent mechanism. We do have a means of communicating. The problem is, the interesting thing is South Africa, for years, did not sign the Non-Proliferation Treaty, even though everybody knew they had the capability. It only did after it agreed, this year, a few months ago, only when it became clear that white minority rule was going to end. And the whites began to fear what happens if blacks get control of the bomb. So they quickly signed the Non-Proliferation Treaty. So any country that has it, I mean, and I can only see the need growing, or desire for it growing. One of the problems with the Gulf War, and this is a bit of a digression, but it's my favorite subject, so I'll digress as I please, is the fact the Gulf War didn't cost us enough. It wasn't bloody enough. It was for the Iraqis, but not for the rest of us. One of the reasons Madrid isn't working is because, frankly, there wasn't enough of an incentive. There isn't yet enough of an incentive for everybody to compromise. It was over the Gulf War was over too quickly with a low enough death toll, limited bloodshed. 100-hour war isn't bad, or a 42-day war, whichever way you want to look at it. And as a result, rather than teaching people, look, we don't want to be like Iraq, we don't want to have chemical weapons, we don't want to have ballistic missiles and so forth, everyone in that region now feels even more vulnerable and wants, therefore, the capabilities of Iraq or Israel. And so the arms race is only going to heat up. The Gulf War, unfortunately, backfired on us. And I think history will look back on it as a real glitch rather than a great triumph. That's not a popular thing to say, but yeah.
Are religious states going to become a greater wave of the future? Could such be viable?
That's a good question. If I were a betting woman, and of course I'm not, I'd put my quarter on not having more religious states in model like Iran on a theocracy where the clergy makes up the majority in parliament, the majority in cabinet. It doesn't anymore, but in the early days it did. The chiefs of state. I would bet, however, that religious forces in all countries, with all religions, will be more vocal, more visible, more influential, be it Buddhist monks in Tibet, liberation theologians in Latin America and Peru, Latin America, Philippines, Haiti. I've just returned from Central Asian republics in the Soviet Union, places most people have never heard of, Kazakhstan and Tajikistan and Uzbekistan and Kyrgyzia, Turkmenia. And one of the most interesting phenomena is the emergence of Islam as a very potent idiom of political expression. And this is not fundamentalism. These are not Shiites. These are Sunnis, very thoughtful. Not that Shiites aren't, but there's a difference in the activism of the two branches of Islam because Shia believe that the clergy are empowered to act to give God's direction to the human being. Therefore, the clergy, people like Ayatollah Khomeini, have much more influence on the everyday Shia Muslim. Whereas in the Sunni religion, they believe that man's relationship with God is direct rather than through the clergy. And so their clergy are more spiritual advisors or counselors, and therefore don't have the ability to mobilize them in the way Khomeini could. Anyway, Islam is becoming very potent. And my first night in the Soviet Union, on this trip, I was invited to a wedding. And I went along fully expecting, a wedding, and discovered that in fact it was a circumcision for two little boys aged 3 and 5. And they call it a wedding because it marks the little boy's marriage to Allah, or God. And it is these kind of life cycle rituals that have allowed Islam to remain a very potent force in the lives of 50 million people in the Soviet Union. And I think it's going to be a very influential, I think in the same way the Russian Orthodox Church is probably going to become more active in the Soviet Union. I think throughout the world, particularly when we're going through a transition, particularly when it's a time of instability or uncertainty, people turn to their faith. A Peruvian psychiatrist and historian, a marvelous character named Max Hernandez, compared it to a tornado. He said, what happens when a tornado comes through town? And being from Iowa, you probably all know. He said, people go to their basement and they cling to the pillars. Well, a political transition is the same way. It's a political tornado. And people go to the basement and they cling to the pillars, the things that have sustained them or their families or their traditions throughout history. And one of those, the most potent of those, arguably, is religion. Yes, sir.
Yeah, I'm not really very clear about your definition of democracy, but I'm taking that in this United States of America, where on an average 30 to 40% of the population votes. Right? If you take this to be a democracy, that's your terminology for democracy. Do you think it's necessary to have this democracy prerequisite to economic success?
I didn't hear the last part of it.
Is democracy a prerequisite for success?
A prerequisite for success. Well, a democracy, it's not my definition of democracy. Democracy is involves freedoms to do what you want, and people are free to choose whether they want to vote or not vote. Unfortunately, the majority of Americans don't think of it enough as either a privilege to carry it out. Is democracy a prerequisite for success? I'd put it a different way, because I think there's a difference between success and progress, even though they're often considered synonyms. I think certain freedoms are requisite to provide man with the kind of incentives that he will willingly, eagerly engage in progress. Yeah? You want to argue with me on that one?
The third way, something comes, I've been reflecting on that. What about the East Asian semi-democracies or authoritarian, paternalistic, I'm thinking of Singapore.
I don't think of that as a third way. It's a third world version of authoritarianism.
Taiwan, South Korea, Malaysia.
Yeah, oh, absolutely, and I think they're terrific models for the third world. I think that arguably in a lot of third world countries, Taiwan, the newly industrialized countries, the NICs as they call them, Taiwan, Singapore, Yugoslavia at one point, Israel, will be more models that are more applicable for third world countries than the United States. I'm not convinced that we are a model for anyone, because the circumstances are just so different. In terms of, we started from scratch, we have vast resources, we have, we can be in principle self-sufficient.
Does the third world see that?
I think so. I think increasingly that there are a lot of third world regions that are thinking both in terms of the new region state. For example, in South Africa, they're already talking about the post-apartheid Southern Africa Union. This is grouping countries that have been engaged or been considered rivals since 1948, since the Afrikaners assumed power. But I think increasingly they think the model is a country that works hard, offers incentives to foreigners to invest and make their clothing and so forth. The danger is that if it doesn't work, they will also turn to the kind of authoritarianism that many of those countries have too. Yeah.
In the light of what you talked about in your address about a lot of the local political conflicts and all the social conflict at a smaller scale, like you talked about, I'm curious what you think would be a good model or a good policy for American foreign policy as far as dealing with things like that. I mean, we have our own problems, and you sort of hinted that they're getting worse. So what, and from your perspective, being somebody international type person, what do you think? I mean, would it be better for the U.S. to be more interventionist, less interventionist? Should we let things happen as it's from this sort of transitional period? I mean, what would you think?
Well, here my personal bias and my position as an analyst are the same. I strongly believe that we need to be extremely careful about intervening in any conflict anywhere, that there will be an enormous temptation to get involved. But we will do so at an ever-increasing price, politically, diplomatically. One of the interesting lessons of the Gulf War that not many people have thought about is the fact, because we've all been saying the Soviet Union is no longer a superpower, we're the only superpower left. Well, the interesting thing about the Gulf War was that it showed that we can't fight a war by ourselves. We can't even afford it. We had to have several other countries pay for it. And I think, yes, it was of a scale that we needed help, but I think that there are an awful lot of circumstances that we're not going to be able to afford to intervene. And so that on two levels, both politically and economically, we need to be very careful about how we go in. I also think that the United States has to think very seriously, as the rest of the world begins to demilitarize, about demilitarizing ourselves and the cost we may pay as a nation to try to sustain our military-industrial complex, while everybody else is converting their military industries to more viable or more productive economic industries. It's going to be a real challenge. We assume that it's so obvious. Of course, that's what East Germany should do, and that's what the Soviet Union should do. But I think we've got to think about it ourselves, too. I don't think any nation wants us to be the policeman of the world. And I think, George Bush said this in the last couple of months, I think a couple of times, that he doesn't particularly want to be the policeman of the world. But when it comes to getting people like Noriega or going after terrorists in Beirut or whatever, there's going to be an enormous temptation because now we think we can do it and there's going to be nobody restraining us. Yeah.
You closed your address on such an optimistic note. We can see changes that happens, we can manage, we can control the direction, whatever you said.
We have choices.
We have choices.
And we can see those choices.
I'm eager to hear your most optimistic, your most hopeful scenario.
Oh, for what? I mean, listen, this is only the beginning of the kind of issues I've written about in this book. In terms of...
Who are the we and what can we do?
All right. We as the American population probably have more access to more information than any group of people anywhere in the world. And perhaps the most valuable commodity in the world is not gold or oil or even water, but information. And we should be using that information, be it in an educational environment or as individual citizens, to try to understand what the public agenda should be. There's a lot of complaining about, there are no good politicians out there and so forth. Well, the fact is, there isn't a very good agenda out there. People aren't defining the issues. We know there are economic ills, we know that there are environmental issues and so forth. I'd be hopeful if someone could just get up and kind of say, okay, this should be our policy. This is a new world order agenda. We get a lot of talk, but if you remember, the new world order emerged out of a crisis. U.S. foreign policy, and I'm taking a bit longer to answer your question, but it's deliberate. U.S. foreign policy in the era since we became a superpower after World War II has been characterized by one common denominator. It has always been reactive. We are not a nation that thinks proactively, that looks long-term and says, okay, this is what we hope to accomplish. This is what needs to be addressed. We've never shown either the foresight or the leadership in defining the world agenda. Everything we've gotten involved in, be it Vietnam, I mean, even China, we were reacting to other events. And I think that it's going to take a fundamental kind of rethinking of our heads, reshaping of priorities. We've got to get out there and define it. We're the same way about politicians. We react to politicians, but we don't come up with agendas ourselves. I would think that we are in a better position to understand the outside world than we ever have been. That if, in the best of all possible worlds, as Voltaire said, we came up with an agenda, it would be very easy then to decide what to do with our monies. At the moment, we're putting Band-Aids all over the world, you know, in terms of aid, who we're giving money to. Our money is still skewed so that it goes to, first to aid recipients are Israel and Egypt. I'm not saying either one should not get money, but I just think there are a lot of places that we need to start thinking about putting money to, or maybe giving it for other reasons. We don't even have a kind of a list of criteria by which we give aid. We give aid in terms of what's politically expedient at the moment, not in terms of what our objectives are long term. I mean, I think, you know, conferences like this where people are exposed to different ideas, get people talking, going. I mean, there are a lot of ways that individuals can get involved and think about things. In terms of hopeful scenarios, I'd like to believe that most of the democracies, and I will be honest with you, not all of them will survive. There's no hope that all of them, that most of them could struggle through in some way, continue to offer the right to vote and the right to free choice of job and education, and right to dissent and so forth. But I keep thinking of places like Peru, where a young journalist on the eve of the third presidential vote when I was in Lima said to me, "Oh yeah, we have democracy. The problem is we have nothing to back it up. We just elect a new king every 5 years." And I think that is not an unfair statement about many of the democracies we've seen so far. I think even places like Czechoslovakia, I think Havel is not a character who's going to last a long time, despite the fact he may be a wonderful guy, may be a good politician, may be thoughtful and have a good agenda, but I just don't see the appetite for him. I keep getting back to the pessimistic side. Again, I think there are choices. I don't think we have indefinitely, though, to make those choices. And I think we need to make some choices about what we do here. I mean, as I said, it's scandalous to me that there's so many homeless and the people don't seem to care anymore. What? I don't know. You know, excuse me, the human being tends to act based on an incentive. He has a stake in it. Maybe it's, whether it's a war or a real depression or something that makes us kind of appreciate. There's been a cycle in American history of wars, recessions, or depressions serious enough to galvanize people back into activity. We haven't been through that. The only war we've had, the two wars we've had, Vietnam, the Gulf War, have been far away. They haven't been on our, you know, you could get out of it. It didn't affect all Americans evenly. It wasn't a national crisis in the same way World War II or even the Korean War was. I'm not sure what it's going to take to end the apathy. I wish I knew. Yeah. You want me to shut up?
I think we have time for any more questions.
U.S. economy has been crippled by the last 10 years of mismanagement. Do you think we would now be seeing kind of more money flowing into help the Soviet Union? And so we think that would make a big difference to this?
I think it would make a huge difference. I think that we sold our country down the tubes over the last 10 years. I think history will look back, particularly on the Reagan presidency, as one of the most disastrous of this century. And I think it's going to be a very long time, clearly not this century, the 9 years remaining, or the 8.5, whatever, that we're going to get out of it.
Do you sense a resentment in other countries for the USA for having, in a sense, sold democracy to them, which works for us, but doesn't seem to be working for them?
Not yet. It's possible. One of the interesting things, when I talked about democracy being not only right to freedom and vote and dissent and so forth, but also being the right to prosperity, the resentment is in part a product of the cultural phenomena. I remember being again in Peru, and I was watching TV. I always turn on the TV to see what local TV programs have. I did it because in Iran once I saw the Pink Panther, and I thought if the Pink Panther can survive in the Islamic Republic, then anything's possible. But in Lima, in the Peruvian television, they had Mr. Belvedere in Spanish. And it struck me, and I talked to various Peruvians about it later, this is the kind of program they get. And they think the average middle-class American has a British butler. That we have raised expectations extraordinarily, and that there is likely to be not so much resentment at us for promoting democracy, which is understandable, but resentment at raising their expectations, which can't be met. There aren't enough resources on this earth for all of us to live as you and I live in this country, even if the people had the money to buy it. You're the last one.
Could you compare and contrast democracies such as Honduras and Cuba? Obviously, Honduras was a U.S.-backed military.
I can't hear you.
I was in Honduras in Agua Caliente when the U.S.-backed military executed campesinos. I've seen how the military there is supported by buying money, and I wonder if you could compare and contrast that kind of democracy.
Well, there's,
with Cuba, the social state of Cuba.
oh, when you said compare democracies in Cuba and Honduras, I was going to say I don't think Cuba is much of a democracy. Then I don't think Honduras is either. I mean, you need right wing. We have made a classic mistake, again, as in our period as a superpower, by choosing a lot of our friends based on who would be literally friendly to us, whatever their ideology. President Mobutu of Zaire is one of the most corrupt leaders, arguably, of this century. There's been a scandal in the way he's ruled his country. I mean, Ferdinand Marcos. You look at some of the people we have selected along the way, and I think that we've made some pretty bad choices. Again, Somoza we supported for years in Nicaragua. And in fact have often shunned, ignored, or refused even to listen to revolutionaries who often model themselves on our own Declaration of Independence. Sad irony. Anyway, I thank you all for defying the weather and coming out. It was very nice of you. Enjoyed it.
There's a reception at 111 Lynn Street in the social room. Tomorrow, Ralston Deffenbaugh, Will Refugees Have a Place in the New World Order, 12 noon. And Tony Benn, Prospects for Peace, Democracy and Social Justice, 8 p.m., Sunroom Memorial Union. Thank you for attending.